Welcome, listeners, to a deep dive exploring the connection between ultra-processed foods and cancer risk. We'll be focusing on a recent study from eClinical Medicine, adding to the research on diet and its effects on health.
This particular study utilized data from the UK Biobank and followed almost 200,000 British adults aged 40 to 69 over a decade.
But before we jump into the findings, let's clarify what exactly ultra-processed foods are. They're not just any foods that have been processed.
Right, the NOVA classification system defines them as formulations made from substances extracted or created from food ingredients.
Many of the convenient, ready-to-eat products common in today's diets fall into this category.
Think mass-produced breads, those breakfast cereals, pre-prepared meals, and all those packaged snacks.
The study investigated whether there's a correlation between eating these ultra-processed foods and developing certain types of cancer. What they found was that higher consumption of these foods was linked to an increased risk of cancer overall.
Each 10% rise in the intake of these foods corresponded with a 2% increase in the overall incidence of cancer.
And the study also pointed to a pretty strong correlation between these ultra-processed foods and ovarian cancer.
Their data showed a 19% heightened risk of developing ovarian cancer for every 10% increase in ultra-processed food consumption.
And looking at specific levels of consumption revealed even more concerning trends.
The group eating the most ultra-processed foods had a 7% higher risk of developing any type of cancer compared to those eating the least. They also faced a 25% greater risk for lung cancer and a huge 52% higher risk of developing brain cancer.
It is important, though, to remember that this is an observational study. We can only point to a correlation and not a definite cause and effect relationship.
That's true. However, these findings do align with other research that suggests diets high in ultra-processed foods might have a negative impact on health.
Interestingly, they also observed a lower risk of head and neck cancer in the participants who ate more ultra-processed foods.
That was an unexpected finding, and it needs more research. It could be related to things like smoking and alcohol, which are major factors in head and neck cancers. It's worth noting that this same study found a connection between eating more ultra-processed foods and higher death rates for certain cancers.
A 10% increase in the consumption of ultra-processed foods correlated with a 6% rise in overall cancer mortality. And this was even stronger for specific cancer types.
For breast cancer, the increase in mortality was 16%, and for ovarian cancer, it jumped to a concerning 30%.
So this is something to think about seriously, because it suggests these foods could not only play a role in the development of cancer, but also in how it progresses.
This raises important questions about the impact of ultra-processed foods on survival rates for people diagnosed with cancer. So what might be the underlying reasons for these connections? One key factor is the difference in nutritional value between ultra-processed foods and whole foods.
It's well known that ultra-processed foods are often loaded with salt, sugar, and unhealthy fats while lacking fiber.
This combination can contribute to issues like obesity and type 2 diabetes, which are established risk factors for a variety of cancers.
And in addition to those nutritional deficiencies, emerging research points to a potential role of food additives and contaminants from processing and packaging that could contribute to cancer development.
There are studies that suggest a possible link between artificial sweeteners and a greater risk of cancer.
And those processing methods used for ultra-processed foods can also create harmful compounds.
For example, acrylamide, a chemical formed during high-heat cooking of starchy foods, has been linked to a greater risk for certain cancers.
The packaging used for these ultra-processed foods is another concern.
Some of these materials contain chemicals like phthalates and bisphenols, which have been linked to endocrine disruption, a potential risk factor for hormone-sensitive cancers.
While more research is certainly needed to definitively establish these links, the evidence we have now suggests that eating ultra-processed foods might make us more vulnerable to cancer.
This then leads us to the question of how we can use these findings to make better dietary choices and lower our potential risks.
So are there practical steps individuals can take to address the concerns this study highlights?
The first step is understanding the NOVA classification system, which categorizes foods based on how much and why they've been processed. Minimally processed foods, things like frozen fruits and vegetables, keep most of their nutritional value and can be part of a healthy diet. Then you have processed foods, things like canned goods and cheese. They've undergone some processing, usually to make them last longer or taste better. And then there's ultra-processed foods. These are formulations made from substances extracted or synthesized from food ingredients. They often have a lot of added sugar, unhealthy fats, and sodium, along with artificial flavors, colors, and preservatives.
So how can our listeners actually use this information in their lives?
Start by taking a look at what you're eating now. What percentage of your daily food intake comes from these ultra-processed sources? Food diaries or those tracking apps can really help you get a clearer picture of your eating habits. Once you know where you stand, you can start making changes bit by bit to shift towards whole, unprocessed, or minimally processed foods.
What are some swaps listeners can make?
Instead of grabbing that packaged breakfast cereal, try some oatmeal with fresh fruit and nuts. And for lunch, skip the ready-to-eat meal and make a salad with grilled chicken or fish. And when it comes to snacks, ditch the chips and cookies for fruit, nuts, or cut-up veggies.
Those might seem like small changes, but they can really make a difference in your overall health.
Absolutely. It's important to pay attention to the ingredients and how processed the foods you're choosing are. It's not about being perfect, but about making changes you can stick with. Cooking at home more often gives you control over the ingredients and lets you cut back on processed foods. It's all about making those conscious choices to prioritize your health and well-being.
The study found a particularly strong connection between eating ultra-processed foods and ovarian cancer. What can we take away from that specific finding?
Well, the study showed that for every 10% increase in the amount of ultra-processed foods someone ate, their risk of ovarian cancer went up by 19%. This is worrisome because ovarian cancer is often caught in later stages when it's harder to treat. We don't fully understand why there's this link, but it's likely due to a combination of factors.
What are some of the potential factors at play here?
As we've talked about, ultra-processed foods tend to be packed with unhealthy fats, sugar, and salt, and they lack fiber. This kind of diet can lead to chronic inflammation, insulin resistance, and hormonal imbalances, all of which have been linked to the development of ovarian cancer.
Could the additives and contaminants in ultra-processed foods also be contributing?
It's possible that some of these additives and contaminants might be directly affecting ovarian cells, potentially encouraging tumor growth. Some studies, for instance, have linked certain artificial sweeteners to a higher risk of ovarian cancer. But we need more research to be sure about these links and to understand exactly how it all works.
While this deep dive is focused on the potential downsides of ultra-processed foods, it's important to acknowledge that other factors contribute to cancer risk as well. What are some of those factors?
Genetics play a role, as do lifestyle choices, exposure to environmental factors, and access to healthcare. Making healthy dietary choices is a big step towards reducing your risk, but it doesn't guarantee you won't develop cancer.
So this research should be seen as just one piece of the puzzle, not the whole picture.
Exactly. It's about taking a holistic approach to your health, considering all aspects of your life. And it's never too late to start making positive changes. Regardless of your age or your current health, every step you take towards a healthier lifestyle can make a difference.
The study also found something quite unexpected: a lower risk of head and neck cancer among those who ate more ultra-processed foods. How does that fit in with everything else we've been talking about?
That's a good question, and it's a finding that definitely needs more investigation. We need to figure out if it's a real protective effect or just a fluke in the data. One possible explanation is that the study didn't fully take into account the complex relationship between ultra-processed food consumption, smoking, and alcohol use. All three of those are strongly linked to head and neck cancer.
So maybe there are other factors involved that weren't properly considered.
That's right. It's possible that the lower risk they saw in the study was actually due to other things they didn't fully control for. For example, people who eat more ultra-processed foods might also do other things that protect against head and neck cancer, like eating lots of fruits and vegetables.
Or could certain ingredients in ultra-processed foods actually have some unforeseen protective effects?
That's another possibility. Maybe some components of ultra-processed foods have an unexpected benefit when it comes to head and neck cancer. Some of these foods, for example, are fortified with vitamins and minerals that could potentially play a role. However, this finding shouldn't be interpreted as a green light to eat ultra-processed foods to prevent head and neck cancer. We really need more research to understand if this association is real and to explore the underlying mechanisms.
So this is an interesting finding, but we shouldn't jump to any conclusions just yet.
Agreed. For now, it's important to focus on what we know are established risk factors for head and neck cancer and take steps to prevent it. That means not smoking, not drinking too much alcohol, keeping good oral hygiene, and getting regular checkups with your dentist.
The study also showed a connection between eating more ultra-processed foods and higher death rates for certain cancers. Let's take a closer look at those findings.
The study found that for every 10% increase in ultra-processed food intake, there was a 6% increase in the overall risk of dying from cancer.
And that association was even stronger for specific cancers.
For breast cancer, there was a 16% increase in mortality. And for ovarian cancer, it was a startling 30% increase.
So this suggests that these foods might not only increase the risk of getting cancer, but also affect how long people survive after a diagnosis. Why might that be?
It's likely that the same things that contribute to developing cancer also play a role in how it progresses and how likely someone is to die from it. The poor nutritional value of ultra-processed foods, the potentially harmful additives and contaminants they contain, and their link to obesity and chronic inflammation could all be factors.
How do those factors specifically contribute to cancer progression?
Well, for example, obesity has been linked to more aggressive tumor growth and a higher chance of the cancer coming back. Chronic inflammation can create an environment where tumor cells can thrive. And it's also possible that ultra-processed foods interfere with how well cancer treatments work. Some studies have suggested, for instance, that eating a lot of sugar can weaken the body's ability to fight cancer cells. We need more research to fully understand these mechanisms, but the evidence we have now highlights how important it is to think about the potential impact of ultra-processed foods on cancer survival rates. It really underscores the need to change our diets, both to prevent cancer in the first place and potentially improve outcomes after a diagnosis.
Let's talk specifically about the findings related to breast cancer mortality.
The study found that women who ate the most ultra-processed foods had a 16% higher risk of dying from breast cancer compared to those who ate the least. This really emphasizes how important diet can be in surviving breast cancer.
What might be the reason behind this connection between ultra-processed foods and breast cancer outcomes?
We've talked about how these foods are often loaded with unhealthy fats, sugar, and salt, and how they're lacking in important nutrients like fiber. This kind of diet can lead to weight gain, insulin resistance, and chronic inflammation, all of which have been linked to the progression of breast cancer.
Could additives and contaminants also be playing a role?
It's certainly possible that some of the additives and contaminants found in these foods might have a direct effect on breast cancer cells, maybe encouraging tumor growth and making them resistant to treatment. Some studies, for instance, have found a link between certain preservatives and artificial sweeteners and a higher risk of breast cancer coming back.
While more research is needed, these findings suggest that dietary changes could be beneficial for those who have survived breast cancer.
That's right. Cutting back on ultra-processed foods is a smart move that could potentially improve survival rates for breast cancer. This is especially important for women who've undergone treatment for breast cancer, as they might be more susceptible to the negative effects of these foods. Along with making dietary changes, maintaining a healthy weight, exercising regularly, and limiting alcohol intake are all important for improving breast cancer outcomes.
We've spent a lot of time talking about additives and contaminants. Can you remind us what exactly these are and what role they might play in this connection between ultra-processed foods and cancer?
Ultra-processed foods often have a long list of additives that are used to improve their flavor, texture, color, and to make them last longer on the shelves. While many of these additives are thought to be safe in moderation, there are concerns about the potential health effects of some of them, including a possible link to cancer.
Which additives are causing the most concern?
Some studies have shown a link between artificial sweeteners like saccharin and aspartame and an increased risk of certain cancers, though more research is needed. Another group of additives that are raising red flags are nitrates and nitrites. These are commonly used as preservative in processed meats. In the body, these compounds can turn into nitrosamines, which are known to cause cancer. While nitrates and nitrites are found naturally in some foods, like vegetables, the high levels found in processed meats are what's causing concern.
And what about contaminants? Are there specific examples listeners should be aware of?
Yes, ultra-processed foods can contain contaminants that get in during processing or from the packaging materials. One example is acrylamide. It's a chemical that forms when starchy foods like potatoes and bread are cooked at high temperatures. Acrylamide has been classified as a probable human carcinogen and has been linked to an increased risk of some cancers.
Are there any contaminants related to packaging materials?
There are concerns about bisphenol A, or BPA, a chemical used in some plastic packaging. BPA can leach into food and has been linked to endocrine disruption, which can increase the risk of certain hormone-sensitive cancers like breast cancer. Regulatory agencies have set limits for BPA in food packaging, but it's still a good idea to limit your exposure by choosing BPA-free products whenever you can.
So how can people minimize their exposure to these potentially harmful substances?
It all starts with being a savvy label reader. Look for products with a shorter list of additives and choose ones that don't have artificial sweeteners, nitrates, and nitrates. Opting for fresh or minimally processed foods whenever possible is another way to reduce your intake of additives and contaminants. And cooking at home more often gives you control over the ingredients and helps you cut back on processed foods. Additionally, choosing BPA-free packaging materials can help reduce your exposure to this potential endocrine disruptor.
We've talked about the lack of nutrition in ultra-processed foods and their potential connection to obesity and type 2 diabetes. Let's dive a little deeper into that.
As we've mentioned, ultra-processed foods tend to be high in calories, unhealthy fats, sugar, and salt, while being low in fiber. This type of diet can contribute to weight gain and increase the risk of developing both obesity and type 2 diabetes.
And both obesity and type 2 diabetes are risk factors for a number of cancers.
That's right. There are established risk factors for several types of cancer, including breast cancer, colorectal cancer, pancreatic cancer, and endometrial cancer.
How do obesity and type 2 diabetes increase the risk of cancer?
The mechanisms by which they do this are complicated and involve a number of factors. Excess body fat can lead to chronic inflammation, which creates an environment where cancer is more likely to develop. Adipose tissue, or fat tissue, also produces hormones like estrogen, which can stimulate the growth of certain cancer cells.
And what role does insulin resistance play in all of this?
In type 2 diabetes, high blood sugar levels can damage DNA and increase the risk of cellular mutations that can lead to cancer. And insulin resistance, a key feature of type 2 diabetes, can promote cell growth and proliferation, which may also increase cancer risk.
Given the strong link between ultra-processed foods, obesity, type 2 diabetes, and cancer, it seems crucial to address all of these interconnected factors. What are some practical steps people can take to mitigate these risks?
It's essential to make dietary changes that will help you maintain a healthy weight and prevent type 2 diabetes. This means eating a balanced diet that's rich in whole foods, fruits, vegetables, and fiber, while cutting back on ultra-processed foods, sugary drinks, and unhealthy fats. Regular physical activity is also crucial for maintaining a healthy weight and improving insulin sensitivity.
What about for those who have already been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes?
If you have type 2 diabetes, working closely with your healthcare provider to manage your blood sugar levels effectively is key to reducing your cancer risk. These lifestyle modifications not only help prevent cancer, but also improve your overall health and well-being.
This brings us to the broader implications of this research. What are some of the public health measures that could be considered based on these findings?
These findings highlight the need for public health policies and initiatives aimed at reducing the consumption of ultra-processed foods and promoting healthier diets.
What specific policies could help address this issue?
One approach is to implement food labeling regulations that clearly indicate the degree of processing of food products. This would give consumers the information they need to make informed choices about the foods they're buying and eating. Another strategy is to tax ultra-processed foods, kind of like how sugary drinks are taxed in some places.
Taxing these foods could help discourage people from buying them. What could we do with the money raised from this tax?
The revenue generated from such a tax could be used to fund programs and initiatives that promote healthy eating habits.
And what role can public awareness campaigns play in tackling this problem?
Governments and health organizations can put money into public awareness campaigns to educate people about the potential health risks associated with ultra-processed foods and provide guidance on making healthier choices. These efforts should be aimed at people of all ages and from all walks of life to make sure the message gets across to everyone.
Are there any bigger picture issues contributing to the prevalence of ultra-processed foods that need to be addressed?
Yes, absolutely. Beyond what individuals can do, it's crucial to address the systemic factors that make ultra-processed foods so common. This means promoting the availability and affordability of fresh, unprocessed foods, especially in lower-income communities.
How can we make it easier for people to access healthier options?
Supporting local farmers and food producers can help create more sustainable and fair food systems that prioritize fresh, whole foods. And it's important to restrict the marketing of ultra-processed foods, especially to children.
So it's about creating an environment that makes it easier for people to make healthy choices.
Right. Creating supportive environments that make it easier for people to choose healthy options is key to reducing ultra-processed food consumption and improving overall health. It's not just about personal responsibility, it's about building a society that puts health and well-being first.
Let's recap what we've covered today about ultra-processed foods and cancer.
We discussed a recent study that suggested eating more ultra-processed foods might increase the risk of developing certain cancers and even dying from them. We talked about why these foods might be linked to cancer, including their poor nutritional value, the additives and contaminants they contain, and how they contribute to obesity and type 2 diabetes. We also explored the broader implications of this research and the need for public health policies and interventions to address how much ultra-processed food people are eating.
What's the key message for our listeners today?
The evidence tells us that cutting back on ultra-processed foods is a smart move to protect your health and potentially lower your risk of cancer. It's about shifting to a diet that's full of whole, unprocessed, or minimally processed foods.
What advice do you have for listeners who are thinking about changing their diet?
Remember, even small changes can add up over time. Start by swapping one unhealthy choice for a healthy one today, and go from there. Cook at home more often, try out new recipes, explore different cuisines, and enjoy the process of nourishing your body with good food.
Are there any resources where listeners can find more information and support?
You don't have to do this alone. There are resources available to help you make healthier choices. A registered dietitian can give you personalized guidance. You can also connect with online communities for inspiration and support. And don't forget to advocate for policies that make it easier to access affordable, nutritious food.
As we wrap up this deep dive, what's one final thought you'd like to leave our listeners with?
The link between ultra-processed foods and cancer is complex, and research and debate are ongoing. However, the evidence we have now gives us compelling reasons to pay attention to what we eat and prioritize whole foods for optimal health. Stay informed, think critically about the information you encounter, and make choices that empower you to live a healthier and more fulfilling life.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of ultra-processed foods and cancer. We hope you found it informative and helpful.